I want to thank Deeper Community Alberta for their invitation here to come share with you from a space of lived experience and scholarly work, as well as theology and philosophy and the intersections of disabilities. It's unfortunate I cannot be there with you in person. As a teacher, we are in the midst of the first week of our spring semester, so I'm here equipping students to grow and change our world. I did quite enjoy being a part of Wednesday night with you all. As we enter in, I want to invite you to take a few deep diaphragmatic breaths and just let go of the stress of whatever chaos you experience coming here today, of maybe those feelings of discomfort you may have started to experience hearing different stories, or even those feelings of affirmation, so that you know that it is okay in the learning dialogue to be uncomfortable. It is okay not to know, and it is okay to feel challenged and to engage that challenge and grow from it. But that's what the purpose of a conference is. That is what the purpose of theology is, and that's what the purpose of life in Christ is. That is what the physician Luke talked to us about as he shared the story of belonging at the table that this conference is shaped around. And I'm here to discuss belonging at the table in the very specific lens of when Luke meets the disabled Church of Alberta. So when one first comes to the banquet story of the conference theme, if read literally or through a traumatized soul, whether caused by religious or medical trauma or life trauma or the intersections of those types of traumas, it confirms everything that someone like me or my son with disabilities is groomed to exist in. It is the implicit bias we're soaked in, so we do not even realize it. Think about it. The first round of invites in this story is what the world would see as normal or typical. Those with, in a very Albertan fashion, deemed to have social capital. That is the mover and shakers, the money makers. They had worth for what they had contributed to the local economy, the size of their bank accounts, and the power of their titles, and that positionality within society as persons. You know, those ones during a pandemic where our disabled neighbors were at risk for loss of life had the privilege to whine about the oppressiveness of masks, vaccines, and just wanting their beer and nachos on Saturday night before worship on Sunday morning, and how dare we care about those others who are not fully people because they do not contribute. But then there's this second wave. These are what we know as the invisible majority. The invisible majority. In our colonized theology, we state it as the theology of the margins. But this is the invisible majority. They make up the majority of the world that is not white, heterosexual, and usually male. Within the invisible majority, we have huge and massive intersections. The last Stats Canada surveys reported 1 in 3 Albertans identify with a disability. That is roughly 1.7 to 1.8 million. Now, this does not take into account the full scope of a disability definition under the myth of normalcy. It does not fully encompass substance use disorders, process addictions, or even mental ill health completely. Because with those invisible disabilities, and other invisible disabilities, we tend to not give credence to. We tend to default to that stigmatized, biased setting of, well, the person just needs to do better, or they need to strive harder, or somebody just needs to give them a talking to, or they're simply lazy. Or. I'm sure you've heard some or accidentally may have said some, not realizing with the 1 in 3 makeup who is actually in the space with you. And that stigma can stop those from identifying these as disabilities, and they're trapped in what is known as a moral lens of social capital and ableism. Both of those things allowed for the eugenics history in our province, that from 1924 to 1972, we had the Sterilization Act for the mentally deficient. And the last forced sterilization in our province on record thanks to the media, is around 2023. This isn't a practice that has ended. And we did try to use our notwithstanding clause in the 1990s to not pay reparations to those who were forcefully sterilized under that act. And we also had institutions such as the Michener Center, which were highly abusive to persons with disabilities, but supported by the colonial church and the state. In social capital, Alberta loves to humble brag that we have the highest disability entitlement in Canada with our AISH, our assured income for the severely handicapped. Aside, the word handicapped itself is derivative. It was used as a term of mockery for the disabled who had to come cap in hand to collect alms from churches and prove that they were disabled enough to deserve the help. They were beggars on the street, literally. But what we leave out in this humble brag is we're still far short of the goal of break even or crossing the poverty line for these folks. We may have the highest, but you're still in poverty. You're still struggling day to day for survival. Your food, which you may have dietary needs, is still coming from food banks, which may or may not be able to answer that call if you can navigate the system to get the to and from. The other thing to understand is that even with our meta-narrative that there's rampant fraud within our government elements like AISH or Alberta Works, which some will know as welfare, reality is within any government support, this fraud that is deemed is less than 3%. But we design our systems and our expenditures to keep folks off the systems to fulfill this narrative, instead of empowering individuals to thrive. As a result, Alberta has the lowest global access with less than 80,000 individuals on AISH. But hey, that good old boy cure theology, in a few scant weeks in June, hallelujah, there will be a mass cure. And all these folks on AISH will be able to work once more. And we're going to get them jobs. Because the government said so. And amounts will drop, and amounts for clawbacks will shrink, and poverty will increase, and the despair, because the government hasn't released plans on how this is all to happen, and how you're to get back on AISH that your doctors said you needed, is unclear. Even those who provide supports in this community, it's unclear too. And we have die-ins to protest on legislature steps. We ask for basic dignity and toileting. We ask for federal plans to alleviate poverty, but our province will claw those back dollar for dollar. Oh, but don't you be an adult, and don't you dare fall in love and want to marry. For we will find a way to strip away your benefits, and the church will shower praise because of smoke and mirrors policies of governance that fits another implicit bias. The disabled do not exist as full persons, sexual beings with a vocational call of their own. They exist simply to accept what they are tossed, invited last to fill spots or take on scraps, for this is the trauma hearing. This is a literal reading with Luke. But this is also a reading which Luke never is. Did you know that 92% of disabled Calgarians live in fear of domestic violence? That is 20% higher than female identifying Calgarians. This domestic violence considers physical, emotional, mental, financial, and sexual. 98% of folks with cognitive disabilities and nonverbal will face sexual violence in their lifetime. It is because of a system, colonized system, still perpetuated and supported by some church theology, that one should be happy with what they are given. We should make do. They should accept their help and what the currently non-disabled majority deems they're worthy of, and the means tests designed by them. We are seen in the false narrative of government and church ledgers always as a debit, never as a credit. The ability to see how universal design, how support to each individual to thrive actually grows healthy community is missed in the false fear that it is constantly perpetuated of scarcity. It is rooted in avarice, or as Paul would say, love of money. It is also rooted in the false masculine patriarchy of the strong, able-bodied man that creates social disability as well as physical, neurological, and mental disability. This doesn't even touch on things Luke's gospel root in the beginning around gender, sexuality, race, and culture. How easily we forget that the culture of empire of the time and the culture within the oppressed was one of castes, even if that word was not used. Same as we have the caste system today. The terms we use are stratification, privilege, to name but a few, that are the roots of the ism trees. For in Luke, it begins with God breaking the system, while Joseph and Mary's dad bartered. God went to the non-entity, the sexual property of any Roman man, remember that 98%, who passed by. The one whose only value was in what they could produce child-wise. A social capital. Mary was to accept her lot. She was to accept that back then the pronoun she was the equivalent pronoun we hear in the systems today, whether education, medical, spiritual, or others, that easily look at the disabled person, even the child, and use the pronoun it. Or the Christian private schools that cling to the defense of American diagnoses when they use the R word. Or the fact that Alberta does not have a Disability Rights Act. It is employer or system positive in accommodations, so the concept of burden is determined not by the one in need of accommodation, but by the one providing it. And within this, you are to accept, just like Mary was to accept, her lot in life. For there is fear. What happens if I speak too loudly, make myself too big, push back too much? What if they walk away and leave me, alone, in the cold, stuck, not knowing where to go next, or where home is? Remember that 92% that fear domestic violence? That is from personal loved ones and caregivers. There's also professional caregivers that may chart you are difficult if you assert your personhood, or dangerous, and as such then, restraints or other measures will be used, like in Alberta education. Instead of learning to be in community and learning about the child, we bring back seclusion rooms. Yes, we toss our disabled kids in a prison hole because we do not want to do the work to discover how to be community and thrive in learning. It is simpler to lock them away till they calm down. God asked Mary. I'm sure Mary feared, like everyone who's reliant on another for dignity in life, that this answer, this push, could end it all. Is why we lead in medical assistance in dying in this province. Not because of imminent death, not because of the disability. It won't even be because of the mental ill health diagnosis in 2027. No, it's because of lack of dignity, pain, poverty, lack of connection, being a burden. Is the implicit bias in church that I hear. Won't it be great to see your son in heaven when he'll be complete and normal finally? Everything the system has told you since day one. Everything the government told us during the pandemic. You're expendable for the economy, for worship. Mary said yes. An empire and oppressors shook with fear. That rippled through to the death of her son because they feared the voice of the invisible majority saying clearly, I am a person deserving dignity. And my response to those so heavily minded, no earthly good ableist prayer warriors, he is complete and whole and kicking ass in this life for God because he is made whole now. Which brings us back to the banquet invite, for it is not literal. It is contrary. It is revealing, it is calling out to each of us where we place community and calling each of us in with the heart to hear. The scrambling invite are the ones that need to be there and should have been the first invite. It is dumping the oppressive colonial empire system on its head. And to use a wrestling metaphor, curb stomping it. Open the doors and ask. The table is one of belonging in spite of where we exist, despite what is comfortable for us. The table is one of belonging because thousands of years ago, a simple physician named Luke recorded a narrative that told us what society dictates as a person is invalid with God. The question we have before us is, what is our answer to who belongs at the table? The action is, what are you going to do about it?
So Um, Ty's presentation brought a lot of thoughts and questions to myself, but I want to open it to you guys. If you may have any questions for Ty, please drop them in the chat room or unmute and feel free to share your questions directly.
As I tell my students, don't worry about if you mess up language or terminology. We'll gently correct as we go forward. There's no question off the table. I was a guest lecturer at a local university during the first houselessness crisis under Klein. So I've faced anything possible. So it's all good. Whatever you have, you're free to ask. If I think it's too personal, I'll tell you.
It's more, I think, a comment than question. I just was reflecting on, like, the question Eric asked us at the beginning about, like, home, right? And, how we brought up these pieces of, safety, feeling safe to be ourselves, like rest, peace, um, and then, just, yeah, seeing the video illustrating the opposite, like, home is a place where, um, many people with disabilities experience harm and unsafety, and it's the opposite um, for them, and how hard that is. And then even within their own communities and province, country, not feeling welcomed, right? It's the opposite of home and what home ought to be. And it just, yeah, it's prompted me to reflect on what does that then also look for our churches, right? Or it's supposed to be a place of belonging, right? Where we are the body. Um, and then yeah, what are we doing that makes it the opposite of home? Like a dysfunctional or um, a traumatic home or an unhealthy home.
Practical theologian John Swinton out of Scotland. He does dementia ward work as a chaplain, as well as works with mentally ill health there, mostly with schizophrenia. I love how he challenges our politics of inclusion. It's the comfortable pew, basically. It's where we rest, saying, well, we have a spot for you. You might be able to get into the building, and if you do, you can park it here. There's no connection. Or we talk about, well, this is what the world says is needed to prepare for the coming of those with disabilities into our church. He pushes us into belonging. What's connection? What's risk? What's emotions? How do we know? Um, At one conference I was at this year, I loved how they reframed inclusion as openness and curiosity. Are we open and curious about the person in our church and how we can support them to thrive? Father Matthew Schneider has a wonderful resource out, God Loves the Autistic Mind. Outside of his work on autism and parish churches, he also has 52 spiritual devotions developed through an autistic mind, his own. And he does share, he's like, these are the facts of autism, but know the person with autism or the autistic in your church is their own person. You need to understand who they are. And I love his one quote that comes out of that work, because too often our churches get lost in what we must prepare for. He goes, we're here. Are you going to deal with us, or just continue to tell us silently to leave so you don't have to deal with us, basically? And that's the meta message. If we continue to perpetuate this, we must prepare for. Folks are already there. Masking is when you try to present what the typicals want you to be, and it's exhausting. So are we going to shift our paradigm to understand folks with disabilities already exist in our communities, whether it's visible or not? And let's change the conversation so we can become those spaces of connection and belonging, those home spaces, even if they may not be existing within where they are now.
So, Ty, just what do you see as some success stories then from this journey that you've been on? Lots of information to share, but just, yeah, what are some things that we can celebrate in this time? Hopefully, there is one or two.
Well, once we threatened a lawyer, the government actually got off their patriarchal idea of just because you have a stay-at-home parent, a child doesn't deserve supports in the PDD system. So you have to be aware of that. With each win, there's a mass issue that the church just does not speak into. Currently, we have a 3-year wait list for persons with developmental disability supports after they turn 18. There's a court wait list and backlog on guardianship and trustee orders, which puts our kids at risk who need those because they may not be in place when they turn 18 navigating a medical system. And we have an FSCD wait list. My blessing was my son managed to navigate through these systems before our current governance decided to decimate them. We are in a challenging time. You take your wins to your personal places of connection and belonging, and you try to do the best you can. It is not. It is hard to find hope. And part of it is churches understanding that those families, those persons with disabilities, those self-advocates, can't always be doing the heavy lifting. The information is out there. Churches, if they are authentically want to be places of belonging, need to start putting in some of their own elbow grease on this. We also need to tear down our denominational walls a bit, because there's many opportunities like today, like others, being offered to connect and learn. And we like to keep it in sort of a denominational framework. Well, could you come and do that here? Okay, but it's offered over there. Why do we need to replicate it here? Just have the right brand on it. um, so yeah, there are places of belonging and thriving if you can find them. You still may have to create some space of advocacy in that for things around accessibility. It could be architecture. It could be something the person wants to participate in. You have to be open to listening. It is a mind and eye and heart and soul shift for the people in the communities. So recently, it has been challenging, and it has been hard to find those spaces. My son has an amazing day program, thankfully, that we were able to keep him in. When he goes to the rink to watch his Alberta Junior Hockey League team, he is part of the community there. And when we were at the Nationals last year in Calgary, teams from around the country saw him as a super fan. Those aren't always the experiences in worship services. When we were at a church that closed for the time we could be there, even though it was a dark period for my son, we were seen, we were understood, we were connected with at Marda Loop. And the failed prayer for me there is I wish Marda Loop was able to see my son when he wasn't battling for his own life, so they could actually see the full vibrancy there. They got a little bit of his flair of sassily heckling the pastor. And now we're in a community, a church now that has some of that, but still has other pushes and pulls, and still has that expectation of those within that community trying to find that change, but working on that change of mindset. It's still a challenge. In my land acknowledgement, I point out that a region has finally decided to start doing the heavy lifting, and now we're going to see what comes out of that. But these are the hard places and the hard challenges.
I guess just as a church, I'm just looking for some encouragement that maybe we're doing one or two right things. Yeah, there is a long way to go, absolutely. And yes, there's a huge separation between church and state within Alberta that I wish was closer and that we could work and partner together. So yeah, just I do definitely appreciate your story, and there are so many like that, and definitely have a lot, keep working, big shoes to fill in terms of what does this look like, from Bible examples and just trying to learn together and like I had said, collaborate and just see, what are the bits that are working well so that we can um hopefully encourage each other in conversations like this rather than leaving defeated and what's the point. So thank you for sharing, Ty.
Corinne, one of the things you can do is Father Richard Rohr speaks to the healing of the woman who was bleeding and says, the biggest thing that is missed that churches can start to do is ask, why did she have to lose everything before somebody helped her? We default our justice role. We don't need a closer relationship of church and state. We are already seeing the detriment to that with the atrocity of the pay for access Premier's prayer breakfast this past weekend. What we need is churches willing to step into the risk and go, these people are persons. Why aren't we doing what our faith calls us to do? Why aren't we ensuring there is a above poverty entitlement? Why are we forcing work for welfare? Why are we reviewing expenditures on things like FSCD and PDD because they cost us too much money on the bottom line of our taxpayers' dollar? It is asserting personhood. It is using our privilege as church to actually speak and amplify the voices of the disabled in our buildings within our communities. And we have defaulted out of that conversation. And those are the things that we can do. And if you want encouragement, it is to be in an uncomfortable pew. and to actually start speaking and partnering and collaborating and doing?
So I think there's a lot of things that the church and the Alberta community has that we need to work on towards building advocacy and building that relational community. Those things of collaboration and relationships that we spoke of. I'm hoping that we can meet after and talk more about this, Corinne, Ty, and we can get together and talk more in the Calgary area.